you guys have kind of helped me transition to our next question, which was the debriefing or the reflective conversation that happens afterwards. I think that's probably one of the most important parts of this, right? The actual observation for you guys, but the type of feedback and the way you give the feedback, because I can imagine there's all kinds of different ways, as basic as just emailing the feedback, which is not as reflective, right? Versus the sit down conversation to have afterwards to talk about what did we see and where the opportunities for growth are. So I guess, Emily, I'm going to toss it to you. How does after the observation period work? How do you provide that feedback? And what do you find is most useful for you and that provider?
Well, what I typically do is set up, so I'll say, we're finishing the observation today, so let's plan like a Zoom call or a meeting when it was face-to-face, set up a meeting for about 30 minutes so we can go through and kind of look at your self-assessment compared to my observation, and we can talk about the differences and what I saw. And a lot of times my providers are harder on themselves and they don't realize they're actually doing all these great things. They're more, hard on themselves because they didn't exactly do it the way that it's written on that form. But I'm really open about it. I don't know how to be any other way for anything, but so I'm really honest. I say, if it's something that they had said, yes, I said, well, the reason I checked no here is because of this. Okay. But I see where part of what you were doing was leading to that, but you kind of didn't come full circle. So we kind of come up with a joint plan ourselves on how they could get to having all yeses or really reaching that full potential, that coaching model.
Yeah, I like how you talk. It sounds like your feedback is very specific. So
yeah.
Not, I saw a no here. You didn't go full circle, but here's why. Here's what I saw. I think that's so important. I mean, with adult learners, that really specific feedback is how we grow. So I love it that you're being that, but also providing it in a way that's sort of constructive and positive too. I mean, there's no perfect visit. There's probably not going to be any perfect coaching sessions. So there's room to grow on every visit. So thanks, Emily. Kim, I'm wondering what kind of open-ended questions you ask when you're providing that feedback to kind of make it reflective back and forth with the practitioner.
First of all, I love being able to meet with the practitioner right after the session because it's fresh in everyone's minds, and I have my notes with specifics. I like to give that specific feedback, informative, positive, just like in our coaching model. But I will ask them, so how did that session compare to previous sessions with this family? And that gives them an opportunity to tell me, this was really different because, or this is really how it goes. I'll ask them to tell me more about something, a situation that seemed challenging for the provider or something that was going really well. Tell me more about when you were asking mom about the joint plan and why she struggled to follow through on that. What were you thinking, and what do you think the parent was thinking about, or what were the barriers? So tell me more. What do you think about? How did it go? What did you notice about the parent's response when you asked this? Again, I have my specific notes in place that I can really pinpoint some things that happened in the session, whether they were strengths or challenges for the provider.
Yeah, so you're kind of using your coaching questions you might use with a family, but instead using them with the observer to help the observer think through kind of the what, the why, and the how that happened on the visit. I really like the one you start with how does this compare to previous visits or other visits, because I think that can probably break the ice a little bit, where if the provider doesn't feel so great about this visit, then they can that gets the ball rolling and talking about it. Or if it just wasn't a typical day, the child was really fussy or whatever happened, there's space to discuss that. So I think that's a great way to start. Thanks, Kim. How about you, Bonnie? How does it work for the debriefing part? Do you typically meet with people like Kim pretty soon after the observation?
I try to. Again, that first question that I always ask is something very similar. How do you feel that session went?
Yeah.
So, how do you feel your coaching was in that session? Because, sometimes you've got it, and sometimes, it was just a bomb. And it's nice to hear what they think before you go ahead and give them your feedback. I'm going to not throw Kim under the bus, but I'm going to actually give her a kudos. So she did my Fidelity coaching this year, and I love what she did. And I kind of stole it and adopted it. But she, I take copious notes also, but she actually had a Word document with specific things that I said or things that the parents said, like word for word. And it was so helpful because it brought me right back into the session, and I could remember the exact scenario of how it happened, what happened, who said what, and we were able to have a great conversation about it. And so I think that that's really helpful. You know, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, you really did it well, you did this, but it's another to say, this is how the family reacted when you did this. And it really brings it to a different light. And I think it gives a much more picturesque feeling of what actually happened in the session.
Yeah, I like that idea because it ties it directly to what you said or what the family's response was. So it sort of ties the outcome of how that provider coached the family with what was the impact of that? How did that work? I love that idea of kind of looping it, because all the coaching Fidelity work is designed to really just make sure, like Lisa said at the beginning, that the services are provided really meaningfully and with Fidelity for the family so they're getting what they want. So thanks, Bonnie, appreciate that. So you, Lisa, I think, how does that debrief session work for you? And what kind of, and how do you give that feedback in a way that's constructive for the provider, especially when maybe your feedback is a little, it really has to be a little more constructive, where there's a little more room to grow. I'm wondering how that works.
Yeah, well, I think there's a consensus that we all ask, how do you feel the session went?
Yeah.
And when you ask really that question, feel, it goes to the emotions part, and that makes it more personable to start with. But I also ask, what was your favorite part about the session? What did you enjoy about the session? Because that sort of takes off the stress and the pressure that we're going to talk about, how it overall went. Because sometimes, very rare, but sometimes it happens that you do an observation and almost all the answers are no. And that's really tough. And so what I do with everyone is I actually, similarly to others, we schedule a time, and it's we try to always do it right after the session. So we always try to schedule a visit where we have some time after. And like Kim, I love to take notes and be very specific. But instead of sharing my notes first, I always go through each one and ask them how they felt about that question. So it's like doing a self-reflection about the visit that they just did versus their original self-assessment. Mm-hmm. And that's when I learned so much about the therapist, because someone else had mentioned that they're more self-critical. Mm-hmm. I think it was Emily that had mentioned that. And it's totally true. And then they'll say, oh, I don't think I'm really good at coaching or asking open-ended questions, but I had made a list of so many of the questions that they had asked. And when sort of talking about that gives me a window of opportunity to be specific about the questions that I heard. And usually they say, oh, I didn't realize that I asked that. Like, oh, that's great. And just because now we've been doing the coaching interaction style for some time now, everybody is more natural about being able to do it without even realizing that we're doing it. Now we hear much less yes/no questions, or just concrete answers. How many words do they say? Oh, what did they do yesterday? But it's really a lot more analysis questions, like, oh, how does this compare to when you did it last time? And it's really nice to see that growth. And when you're sharing that with the therapist or the observee, it really opens up doors for them to just really reflect more and deeper about what just occurred.
Yeah, I think that's where they're going to learn, is from their own reflection through that discussion, which is really different than, like I said, emailing or just handing them the form that has the yes no's with a couple of notes. So I love the way you guys are spending time with the observers to help build on what they think at the beginning. And that kind of does, like you said, open the door to you be able to provide that feedback that's supportive, not punitive, that's supportive, that says these are the wonderful things you did, and these are some opportunities for growth, or maybe, and every visit has missed opportunities, right? Every visit has a moment that you could have asked an open-ended question, or maybe the joint planning could have gone a different way. But if you don't have somebody giving you that feedback, how are you going to grow? So I love this process as a growth process.